I think that over the last 1 to 2 years, we've already seen American marketers begin to reestablish a focus on business objectives as they throttle down investments into dubious, shiny new objects and instead focus on initiatives that are more likely to be profitable and or enhance their brand's market share.
Hello, and welcome to The Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Hingle. I run the marketing team here at Marketing Architects, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Angela Voss, our CEO, Rob DeMars, our Chief Product Architect, and we're joined by a special guest, Dr. Mitch Olsen. Mitch is a marketing professor, as well as the Director of Undergraduate Studies and Assistant Chair of the Marketing Department at the University of Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. He received his PhD from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University with a focus on innovation and new product development, branding, and green marketing strategies. In his teaching, he enjoys pairing foundational marketing theories with emergent applications of those theories in practice, which sounds a lot like what we're trying to do with the podcast. And before entering the world of marketing academia, he worked brand side as an account executive at P&G. So we're so excited to have you on the show, Mitch. Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here.
What a perfect guest to have. The mix of the marketing experience and the academia side. I love it.
Well, thank you for having me. And I have to say, I'm a fan of the show, and I think it's wonderful what you're building with this podcast and the need it meets in the marketplace. And so, yes, I'm very excited to be here. And I just hope my appearance does not derail the momentum you've done such a good job of building.
Thank you, Mitch, for joining us. We're going to be sharing our thoughts on some recent marketing news. As always, we're trying to root our opinions in data, research, and what drives business results. And as you just heard, Mitch is really a perfect guest for the show. And he's joining us today to talk about a variety of topics, including the state of marketing education at universities, marketers of the future, the reality of marketing research, the state of marketing effectiveness in the US, and much more. But first, I'm going to tee us up with a quick article. This is one that went viral at the end of last year by Mark Ritson for Marketing Week, and it's titled, "Effectiveness Ignorance Has Left American Marketing Lagging Behind the Rest of the World." In the article, Ritson says that Americans are behind in marketing, and he suggests this is due to an ignorance of the concepts of marketing effectiveness that leaders like Ehrenberg Bass, Bennett and Field, and others have made clear and accessible to all. Ritson does acknowledge that P&G remains the world's greatest marketing company and brands like McDonald's produce first-class advertising, but that's not nearly enough leading marketing coming from America. Ritson goes on to say that most American marketers are subpar compared to our international peers, and he ends the article with this call to action. Stop making excuses, America. Get better at marketing again. We miss you. So those are some strong words to open the podcast with, but I thought it would be a great way to start this interview because, Mitch, you are someone here in the US that's passionate about evidence-based marketing and marketing research, and you're teaching the next generation of US marketers. But you didn't start out as a professor. You began your career at what appears to be one of the only American brands that Mark Ritson actually admires for their marketing, P&G. So could you tell us about your early experience at P&G? And then why you chose to transition from brand side marketing to a career in academia?
Yeah, and I definitely appreciated that call out by Mark in the article too. That was one I highlighted when I read through this. So I worked at P&G for about 4 years, and I was in their quote unquote customer business development group. Most people would know that as sales. And I had a few different roles with them. I started off in St. Louis. I was handling health and beauty care at a couple of great regional grocers, Shop and Save and Deerbergs. And then from there, I moved up to your neck of the woods in Minneapolis. At first, I called on another set of great regional grocers of Cub and Coburn's. And then I transitioned to specializing really in paper. So I was working on the Puffs, Charmin, and Bounty brands at Super Value Corporate. And many people, perhaps outside of Minneapolis, aren't so familiar with Super Value. But at the time, they were the second or third largest grocer in the country, depending on how you measured that. And when I started working with Super Value Corporate and their paper categories, that's when they were centralizing many of their operations for the retail banners that they owned around the country. So think Albertsons out west, Jewel Osco in Chicago, Acme and Shaw's out east, and other banners, but that was all being centralized. And I felt across all these different sales positions, incredibly fortunate because I felt like I essentially had a 2-for-1 in terms of industry experience. I got a deep dive into CPG. And then I also had a really nice first row seat in terms of retail as well. And I absolutely love this. But hey, I'm not in CPG anymore. I'm in academia. And really for me, that transition from something that I really enjoy doing at Procter & Gamble to academia initially wasn't an obvious one for me. I don't have any family members who are in academia. So I didn't really consider this as a career path that I was really going to look at seriously until I think many people have different influential professors in their life. And for me, I did my undergrad at Indiana University in the Kelley School of Business. And my introduction to marketing professor, his name's Rockne Walters, just a fantastic marketing professor and all around person. And I remember going to his office hours one day and I forgot what the question was. I think we covered that immediately. But then we got into talking about what he does as a professor. And he mentioned teaching. And of course, I knew that was a big part of it, but I really thought that was the only part of being a marketing professor. But then he discussed how he was able to work on research projects that were interesting to him. And then he wasn't siloed in this ivory tower. He was somebody that really worked actively with companies. And so it seemed like you had the best of two great worlds. And that's something I filed away in my mind. But I noticed as I continued to work in industry, that thought in the back of my mind didn't go away. I kept thinking, what if? And in around year 4, I kind of felt like it was now or never in terms of exploring that really seriously. And so I tempted fate by just applying at 3 different PhD programs. And really that was rolling the dice. If anybody's familiar with the way admissions works for these programs, schools typically only take 2 to 4 students. It's pretty idiosyncratic in terms of what they're looking for. So I thought, I'm going to give it a shot at these 3 schools and see what happens. But I also knew it's not so likely that that'll work. So I was essentially pursuing these 2 different career goals. One, potentially PhD, the other, continuing at P&G, which is a place I really enjoyed. And so many of the roads in P&G sales go to Bentonville, Arkansas. And so I was pursuing something in that route. And I thought the timing of all this would work out great because you typically know which school you're admitted to by April. And at that time, and in my division, roles for P&G weren't announced until June. So, all right, this is great. But of course, it never goes according to plan. And so I got a call around March from my one-up manager and said, hey, Mitch, great news. We're going to bring you down to Arkansas. You're going to meet your new boss, go house hunting. And my heart just sank at that point because it's something that I really wanted to do. But at the same time, I told him I had to disclose, hey, I'm really thinking about PhD programs and I can't have you invest in me, move me down to Arkansas. And really, I'd only be there for a few months. And he said to me, well, think about it. And later, our HR manager is going to call you and you can decide whether you're going to take it or officially pass on this offer. And so I stayed at the office late that night. I was the only one there. I was going through this internal angst of what do I do? Do I pursue the PhD? Do I take this job in Arkansas? And then my phone started ringing and I see it's my HR manager. And just as it starts ringing, I hear this ping on my computer and it's an email from Indiana University accepting me into the PhD program right in that moment. And so I felt like somebody was telling me something. It was a lot easier to take that call and haven't looked back since.
Mitch, obviously, fate was right because it turned out quite well for you. You became a marketing professor at Notre Dame, which is one of the top universities in the US. And I know you're a good one because this is just circumstantial, but you happened to teach my older sister. And she said you were one of her, if not her favorite professors. So I just got to add that in there.
Well, she was one of our top marketing students of all time, truly, yes.
One thing we wanted to ask you is, at Notre Dame, what are your primary areas of focus as both a marketing professor, but then also a director at the university?
So this is my 8th year at Notre Dame, which is hard to believe in a lot of ways. And my primary focus over the last 2 years is a bit different than what it was in the prior 6 years. And really, the prior 11 years, if you include my 5 years in the PhD program. So for those first 11 years, my priorities were extremely clear. It was focus on research and publishing in academic journals. And at a place like Notre Dame, that's a very specific set of journals that we focus on. And then about 2 years ago, though, I transitioned from this research first tenure track role into more of a teaching and administrative role. And for me, that transition's been wonderful personally. And so while I'm still involved with some of my pre-existing research projects, now I feel liberated to really make teaching in a lot of ways my top priority. And so with that, I teach our marketing core class in the full-time MBA program, in addition to foundations of marketing to the undergraduates. And then in my administrative roles, as you said, of director of undergraduate studies and assistant chair of the marketing department, I love those roles because it gives me an opportunity to work with many of the different groups that really make a university work. So I'm the main point of contact for marketing majors and minors. And so I get to interact with the undergrads consistently throughout the year. I also get to work very closely with all of our marketing faculty to determine our curriculum, their teaching interest versus our needs and the timing of that. And then also working with the staff as well to make this happen. And so for me, it's been this great opportunity to feel in a lot of ways much more plugged into the operations of the university and the different groups that make that happen.
Speaking of research, which you've spent a lot of time in, that originally is why I reached out to you. I wanted to learn more about marketing research because we were publishing some of our own as an agency. And it was so enlightening to talk to you about research at the university level and just the research realities that a marketing professor faces. Because I think in the US, we wonder, why isn't there more, people complain we don't have enough marketing research coming out of universities and we're behind. But could you tell us a little bit about, just from your perspective, the state of marketing research and the process of conducting and publishing research at an institution like Notre Dame?
I'll start with the overview of the process because I think that's very connected to, in my opinion, the state of marketing research, at least in academia in the US. And so for those who aren't familiar, at a very high level, the process of publishing and the expectations that go along with that vary depending on the type of institution we're talking about. And so within the industry of academia, we tend to categorize universities into three primary types. So you have your research-focused institutions, or your quote-unquote R1 schools. So we think Notre Dame is a member of this cohort. And here, really the job performance of your tenured and tenure track faculty is primarily on the extent to which you're publishing in this very select group of journals. Now that varies from school to school. Here, it's really 4 primary journals that we're looking at within marketing. And to help facilitate this research focus, our tenured and tenure track faculty tend to do less teaching so they can prioritize research. So they're doing less teaching than, for example, a balanced school. So at one of these so-called balanced schools, the focus of the faculty are fairly evenly split between research and teaching. And on the research side, the faculty tend to be focused on a wider variety of academic journals, so greater breadth in terms of potential outlets. And then you have your teaching schools where faculty, they may still be engaged in research, but really the focus is predominantly teaching. So those are the 3 different types of institutions broadly. And for those R1 schools, when trying to publish in an academic journal perceived as being a member of that top tier or A level journals, the process, it tends to involve submitting your manuscripts to the journal, and it's reviewed by the editor-in-chief or a co-editor. And then they decide whether or not it's desk rejected, it ends there, or if it'll go out to a review team. And if it does go out into a review team, you're typically assigned an associate editor and then 3 other reviewers that will remain anonymous always, essentially. And so then they'll review it. Typically, you go through multiple rounds that can oftentimes take years, many years sometimes. And during each round, the review team, they tell you what you think. Typically, it's where they see the weaknesses, how they want to see things improve. And so then you take it back, you take their anonymous feedback, typically collect more data, run new studies, rewrite the manuscript in an attempt to satisfy them. So that's the process overall. And then tying into the part of your question related to the state of research, in my opinion, I think the publication system for academic marketing research, given the system we talk about, it does a really nice job of encouraging the use of very rigorous research methods to investigate specific questions. But the other side of that coin, though, is the system makes it very difficult for academic marketing research to be publishing papers that provide meaningful insights to managers on really emergent issues in a timely manner. And so you always have this tension between rigor and relevance. And in my opinion, we've done a great job in terms of rigor. But because of that, relevance for extremely topical issues can become a bit more difficult.
So given the amount of resources and energy that Notre Dame is putting into research, what's in it for Notre Dame at the end of the day? Like, if you're getting published, are you somehow getting compensated for that? Is it a reputation? It's a lot of resources and a lot of bandwidth. I have to imagine the university's got to have something in it for them.
That's such a great question because, the university is putting a lot of resources in this in terms of hiring faculty, supporting them not only with salaries, but also their data sets, their labs, et cetera. And so really the what's in it for Notre Dame or other schools with this research is, on one hand, it can be at the leading edge of advancing the thought process, right? In this particular space. And along with that, you'll then be seen as more of a research selective focused school. And at least within the academic group of schools, now you may be seen as more of an elite institution of some kind. So a lot of it, I think, is perceived prestige within academia. And then also, if you're doing this and you're supporting that kind of research, it's a snowball effect where now you're attracting those faculty members who really are some of the world's top researchers, and they want to engage in that. And so, granted, they're doing that in the academic journals. And then I think the hope is they're also the ones teaching these classes. And so now they're training these students on really these very leading edge topics that they're the ones researching.
When we think about Mark Ritson, at least I think of him as sort of like brilliantly blunt. When you think about this article, what's your perspective? Do you believe the US is behind in marketing effectiveness? And is that then being addressed as part of the curriculum at Notre Dame?
Yeah, and thank you for sending me this article in particular. I consider this a nice steakhouse article in the sense that Mark delivered a nice steak in the form of really a informative opinion. And then that steak was served with a good amount of sizzle that made the article really enjoyable to read. And so I loved reading this article. The big question of, is the US behind in marketing effectiveness? I think a couple thoughts I had when I read this article. One is, what do we mean by marketing effectiveness? It seemed like that was never really definitively defined within the article. It seems like the author implies that we're engaging in marketing effectiveness if we're focused on any KPI or set of KPIs. That was my takeaway, at least, versus more, as he said, the tech stack or other things. I think the overriding assumption is, well, we're in better shape if we focus on these KPIs. And I agreed with that to some extent, but I also remember something that one of my professors in the PhD program pushed a lot. So his name was Neil Morgan. Says we need to be very careful about which KPI or dependent variables we're focused on. I just got back from the NRF Big Show, and I noticed that there are a number of different technologies that focus on, now we can capture this KPI of dwell time in store. So the amount of time that we linger in front of categories. And I think it's important to understand, well, how do we interpret these kind of KPIs in isolation? Because on one hand, you can think short dwell time, that could mean in isolation that this customer, they completely bypass the category, or it could mean they're an incredibly loyal shopper and now they can find the item that they want almost automatically. Versus if we're bifurcating this variable, so now we have long dwell time, well, that could either mean a shopper is very engaged with the category and they're absorbing the information, they're enjoying this process of educating themselves, or it can mean there's a great amount of frustration and confusion and we're at risk of losing them as a shopper. So I know that's a bit of an aside in terms of KPI, but for the US in particular being behind in marketing effectiveness, of course, I can't say for certain. I'm not embedded in international marketing organizations. However, when we dichotomize the world between US marketers and everyone else, of course, we're painting with a pretty broad brush here, and there's going to be tremendous variation in how marketers go about their work in different parts of the world. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the US marketers have not been the most focused on tangible business outcomes in the world. So, all right, so let's take that face value. I think perhaps in the spirit of keeping the article short, I didn't think Mark went very deep into a lot of the potential reasons for this. I mean, granted, he does say ignorance of effectiveness is the reason US marketing lags behind. However, I'd like to respectfully push back on that rationale and offer two alternative explanations that are related to each other. So on one hand, the US has recently experienced this extraordinary era of ultra low interest rates and access to nearly free money. And as a result, that has in turn allowed US companies generally, and American marketers in particular, the luxury of focusing on shiny new objects that represented very cool technology, but with pretty ambiguous business use cases. And moreover, the development of many of these shiny new objects, well, they're being led by American companies. And so this period of ultra low interest rates really enabled companies to throw lots of cash at experimenting with things like the metaverse, blockchain, and autonomous vehicles. However, as this historic era of low interest rates has come to an end, you've seen American marketers and their companies pivot back towards a renewed focus on meaningful business objectives, such as profitability. So if the author's take was true over the last decade or so, I think that over the last 1 to 2 years, we've already seen American marketers begin to reestablish a focus on business objectives as they throttle down investments into dubious, shiny new objects and instead focus on initiatives that are more likely to be profitable and or enhance their brand's market share.
Yeah, there's for sure a lot going on there. I agree with you that the article wasn't super explicit in terms of all the thinking that he may have had there. I think those of us that are following Mark have pieced together his brain over multiple podcasts, multiple articles, things like that. It's an interesting point related to interest rates. And I think just broadly, we are seeing a bit of a shift in the US related to, VC funding and private equity and just these firms in the past have maybe thrown more at new startups than now they're comfortable doing and are now getting a little more prudent about what do leading indicators of success look like. Let's not just put a hope and a dream out there that one day we're going to flip to profit. Because I think there's, especially in the D2C space, there have been a lot of companies that haven't done that and a lot of VC and private equity firms that have been burned that way. I do feel like when Mark's talking about marketing effectiveness, to your point, I think what he's focused on is ultimate business outcomes, and there are a set of them. It could be profitability, it's long-term growth, it's leaning into methods like reach and emotional advertising over, I think what he would argue is that the US has become a bit obsessed with kind of the short-term metrics. So back to your example about the short time versus the long dwell time, there are a lot of things we can measure, but what's the most important? And if we're able to prove to our executive teams, to our boards, that we're able to capture, a portion of in-market demand, well, that's great. And we all need to be able to do that. But are the strategies that we're putting into the marketplace the most effective for the long game as well to ultimately win market share growth?
If we are to believe Whitney Houston, she says that the children are the future. So you have a front row seat, Mitch, in the classrooms of the young minds that are pursuing marketing. What does that look like these days? Are people coming in with a renewed sense of energy? I mean, if we are banking on them being the future of marketing, are you feeling like, wow, there's just a lot of new energy coming into the space, new considerations? Like, what does that look like?
I think one of the reasons why I love being at a university is because you are surrounded by energy and optimism among the students all the time. And at least since I've been in academia, that's been pretty consistent in terms of that optimism. And I tend to be more of an optimistic person in general, but I am extremely optimistic about the future of marketing and the talent that we have going into the industry in the long term. The students I see in both my undergrad and MBA classrooms, I'm blown away by. Sure, these students are incredibly intelligent, but they're also, and I think this is the part that I love, is they're humble, they're intellectually curious, and they're willing to take risks while not taking themselves too seriously. And so as a result of that, we tend to have, I think, really meaningful and at sometimes deep conversations. And they see that there are many different routes to success, and they're not afraid of exploring those different factors and recognizing the pros and cons of these two approaches. I love working with the students at all of these levels, and I'm confident that future employers will love having them on their teams as well. And I know, related to an earlier question, I think I missed this, is the extent to which in our classes we focus on effectiveness too. And Now, as part of our curriculum, at least, that's a heavy focus for us. If we think about marketing, if we really distill it into, hey, marketing is here to create value for and capture value from stakeholders, we always have a laser focus on what value are we capturing back so we can be a sustainable corporation in the long term. And oftentimes that comes down to financial outcomes and weighing the estimates of what those will look like based on different marketing strategies that we undertake. But I know heavily emphasizing meaningful KPIs as part of any marketing strategy we pursue, that's an integral thread through all of our classes in the curriculum.
Mitch, I won't age myself by sharing how long it's been since I was in my marketing classes in college, but one burning question I have on that topic, I think you know we're a TV only agency. We only work in linear and CTV. So I'm so curious, what is the perception today of television advertising at the university level? You know, is it seen as super important? Is there not emphasis in any specific area? Curious your thoughts on that.
I think many universities, marketing departments, they recognize the importance of TV advertising and especially its effectiveness of building brand awareness and encouraging existing and new customers to move down that proverbial funnel. And so that's oftentimes how it's discussed in the classroom. I also think that purely because TV advertising has been around for so long, it may sometimes get overlooked by some marketing professors and students, because just like the marketing practitioners we talked about before, who, when we have the luxury, we can focus on these shiny new objects, the same thing happens in the classroom as well. But I think TV advertising can, and it should, be given more attention in the classroom. And I believe that in the near term, we are going to see more of a renewed interest in TV advertising, especially related to connected TV and the opportunities that offers from an advertising perspective. And I think it's seen as incredibly important overall. And I'm bullish on how this will continue to be more of a renewed focus in classrooms.
Well, that's the right answer in front of a bunch of marketers who love TV. So that's wonderful. Mitch, one thing I think must make you a great professor is not only your knowledge and your appreciation of marketing principles, but also your commitment to keeping up with just what's happening in marketing in general. For example, you mentioned you were just at NRF. So one thing we wanted to ask you to kind of close us out today is, what are some of the most interesting things you learned when you were at that conference?
So this was my second year going to NRF. I went the previous year and this year. And for those who have been to NRF, I have found it amazing and also incredibly overwhelming at the same time. They released some attendance figures during the opening keynote, and they said about 40,000 people were there. And I was only able to walk the big show floor for one day, so I had to get back and teach. And so I absolutely recognize that my experience at NRF may be completely different than other people's as well, just given the scale of this event. But as I was walking the show floor and talking to different vendors, I thought it was clear, AI, that of course owns the spotlight now. It seemed like every third booth was either an AI company or one that was integrating AI in a meaningful way in what they were offering. But I did find some of these AI applications to be really intriguing, especially those that were moving beyond text and voice-based conversation. There are two companies that really stood out to me as favorites. I have no connection to these companies. They're just ones that jumped out to me. One was, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Machina. It's Machyna. And so it's a new smart cart company. I've enjoyed at these trade shows following the developments of smart carts in general, but this is a newer one for me, and I believe represents the potential of smart shopping carts powered by AI in some meaningful ways. And so when they were doing a demo, one thing I thought was interesting was you could use your voice just to ask that display in your shopping cart, hey, give me a recipe for a keto-friendly dessert that's under 300 calories. And so then it suggests, say, chocolate avocado pudding. Not sure if that fits a keto diet. So it gives you that, and it gives you the recipe of all the different ingredients with product suggestions. And you can modify these suggestions. And if you agree, you add it to your list, and you have this running list. And then you can press, all right, give me a route. And so that it will route you through the store in an optimized way. And along your journey, because this cart knows exactly where you are, it's going to give you customized product offers and recommendations based on what's in your cart currently. So it's looking for complementary products, also based on your shopper loyalty data, what it thinks you're going to be most interested in. And it's offering another revenue stream for retailers because it's balancing that with the vendors that are applying some trade funds to maybe be top of search in some of these recommendations. And so I thought that was really a clever way that they're utilizing AI to enhance the shopping experience beyond what I'd seen before. And then also, related to that, it's offering a new data source for outcomes that you may be able to capture with a very capital intensive system like Amazon Go and their cameras throughout the store. But here with these carts, you're also able to capture what consumers take off the shelf, put back on the shelf. You see heat maps of the journey throughout the store, what routes they typically take, and then what they're searching for through these AI-powered query systems. The last one that really jumped out to me was this holographic display company, also powered by AI. So it's called Proto, P-R-O-T-O. And they use these three-dimensional boxes to deliver these holographic real-time communications between people. So you can have, if you're teaching a class, looks like the professor is there in the room, but they could be beamed in from anywhere in the world. But it also offers an interactive product experience. So I saw this demo where they had a hologram of Meta's Quest 3 headset. And so this could be placed in a Best Buy store as a multi-touch interaction. So you can turn around the headset, see it three-dimensionally. You can ask questions and say, for example, hey, tell me the top 3 reasons why I should consider the Meta Quest 3. And so it'll give those to you in a very natural way. But I think the part that was really interesting to me was it paired this with real-time visual adjustments. And so if you said, hey, tell me about the joystick, it knows while it's speaking to immediately remove all other components, zoom in on the joystick, and rotate the joystick around to highlight visually some of those features that it's talking about verbally. And so those were some, I thought, kind of cool applications of AI. But clearly, AI was everywhere at the show this year.
Bit of a hot topic. Our world really is starting to look like the Jetsons, don't you think? Like, it's exciting. I'm here for it. I love it.
Oh, waiting for my flying car.
Yes, exactly.
That's great, Mitch. I was going to say, you hit Rob's 2 favorite topics, AI and food.
Absolutely. I'm already trying to get this cart. Where's the sign-up list?
Yeah, like that adopter curve? Rob's the earliest adopter you could ever find of anything new. So he will be buying one of those carts as soon as possible. Mitch, thank you so much for being with us here today. It was really refreshing to get to talk to someone in academia who's passionate about marketing research and just gave me a lot of hope for the future of marketing in the US, just hearing you talk about your students and the rigor that comes out of a university like Notre Dame. And I think it's inspiration for those of us like Angela, Rob, and myself who work at agencies and want to evangelize the good work that the US does. Makes me feel more excited about what we're trying to do with this show and helping people like you and universities like Notre Dame. How can we also help that research become more widely known? Because I think maybe there's a misconception about the US and like marketing research here, just because overseas they might do a better job publicizing it and they have all these thought leaders and it's just maybe more top of mind than it is here. So definitely inspirational. Thank you for your time and go Irish.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed being part of the conversation and especially this bridge that you're creating between academia and practice. So really, really appreciate the mission of this and very, very happy to be a part of it.
That's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. We'd like to thank Ayana Klapaki for producing the show and Taylor De Los Reyes for editing. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you find our show valuable, please leave us a rating and review. Now go forth and build great marketing. It might be helpful if we had someone like you on every show. I'm starting to think. I'm like, uh-oh.
No doubt.
That's research driven.
I definitely learned that I would never get into Notre Dame.
It's okay. I wouldn't either, Rob. It's fine.